So I will briefly present, I will briefly sum up the preceding course. And so we have described the different characteristic scale for wave propagation. And in particular, we have shown that this problem is mainly controlled by two-dimensional parameters, the nonlinearity parameters and the shallowness parameter. And we have tried to reduce the complexity of the problem, moving from a three-dimensional Euler equation approach to a more simple model appropriate for real application in the field, based on the integration of the Euler equation over the vertical. And so we obtained this equation system, which is exact, in fact, without any approximation, and with two unknown terms. This one, which is related to the vertical variation of the flow velocity, and this term, which is non-hydrostatic pressure gradient. So with this approach, it's very important to distinguish the hydrostatic pressure gradient from the non-hydrostatic pressure gradient. Gamma is the vertical acceleration. And then, with using asymptotic expansion in function of the small mu parameter, we have derived the Serre equation. And with we have closed the system, and always with the hydrostatic pressure gradients and the non-hydrostatic pressures with rights as follow. So mu is a very important parameter because the shallowness parameter controls the intensity of non-hydrostatic effect. So you have to have this in mind. So it's a very important parameter, and especially when mu is very small, when you consider very long wave in comparison with the water depth, for instance, tidal motions, few hundreds kilometer length scale for characteristic depths or few kilometers, mu is really small, and in that case you can neglect these terms, and so you obtain the shallow water, the classical nonlinear shallow water equation, the Saint-Venant equation, which are typically hydrostatic equations. It is also true for other very long wave processes, such as tsunami, where the Saint-Venant equations are totally, entirely appropriate for describing this process. So, and it is very important to note that for the physics of non-breaking wave, there is a significant competition between non-hydrostatic processes, and we will show that also dispersion effect, and non-linearity effects. There is a competition between both effects. So we have, remember, we have linearized the equations and obtained this equation for the elevation with classical wave equation, plus the non-hydrostatic terms in a linear framework. And then we have analyzed the evolution of one elementary wave, and we get the dispersion relation, and finally the phase velocity in shallow water. So the phase velocity is a decreasing function of the wave number k. So it is an increasing function of the wavelength. So elementary wave propagate for a specific wave number or specific wavelength at a specific celerity. It is typically what we call dispersion. So each elementary wave propagates at its own celerity. So it's the definition of linear dispersion, frequency dispersion. And we can note that when mu is very small, again like tidal motion, tsunami motion, we can neglect this term. And so C phi equals 1, or in a dimensional form, C phi equal roots GD0. So for a very long wave, the celerity is independent of the wave number, is independent of the wavelengths, and so such waves are non-dispersive. So it is interesting to see that mu controls the non-hydrostatic effect, but also the dispersive effect. Sometimes we mix both effects, but it's relatively different. So mu also controls the dispersion effect. It is very easy to derive the celerity in the general context. So variables with dimension in this case. So it's straightforward from the linearized Euler equations. And once again, you can see that C phi, the celerity, is also an increasing function of the wavelength, with a particular case in deep water. The hyperbolic tangent is close to 1, and so the celerity evolves like the root of the wavelength, independently in that case to the water depth. So I think it's a nice example of dispersion effect. First, if you throw a stone in water, you generate a sort of chaotic wave field with a broadband spectrum. And due to the dispersive properties, each elementary wave propagates at its own velocity. So the wave field reorganizes itself into regular wavelengths with characteristic, reorganizes into a regular wave field with specific wavelengths and a celerity which is given by this expression. So after the impact of the stone, there is for the initial condition, it's a relatively chaotic and very complex wave field. And a short time later, you can see this phase structure, circle phase structure, and the larger wavelengths move faster. So you can see the larger wavelength here, and the shorter here. So it's typical of the dynamics of dispersive wave. So it's I think it's a very nice example to illustrate dispersion effect. And it is the same process at very large scales. You can see the sea state, the wind sea state during storm at a large scale. Once again, you have a broadband spectrum and directly generated by the local wind. And progressively, there is the dispersion effect, like in this case. And far away from the generation, the zone of generation, wave generation, the wave field reorganizes itself, forming swell, very regular waves, in a zone which is not affected by a local wind. So between the impact of a stone and the impact of a storm, there are many similarities. So it was just this part to illustrate dispersive properties. Now we are looking at nonlinear effects. And for that, I will consider that this non-lydostatic term is negligible. It's just for the sake of simplicity of the problem, but because in the whole problem there are interactions between non-lydostatic effects and nonlinear. But just to illustrate the nonlinear effects, I consider the Saint-Venant equation. These equations are fully nonlinear and non-dispersive. And the nonlinear term is related to the advection and also H equal 1 plus epsilon zeta. So there is also nonlinearities in the mass conservation equation. So we can easily recast the equation by denoting C equal roots GH, roots GH in a dimensional form, and in dimensionless form, C equal roots H. So with the mass conservation equation, leads to, we replace H by C squared. C squared dx plus 2 C u dc dx. And if we subtract this, so I eliminate C. If we subtract this equation, this first equation, to the momentum equation, we obtain the first equation. And if we add the two equations, we obtain the second equation. So we have recast the Saint-Venant equation in a characteristic, into characteristic form.
The epsilon went away.
Sorry?
The epsilon disappeared.
Where? No, because the equation is the epsilon plus dhu dx. Okay, without epsilon. And dh is epsilon d zeta. So it's why we have an epsilon in this equation.
Yes, but shouldn't the epsilon u plus minus 2c, because the small epsilon means you have a slow advection and fast wave speed.
Sorry, could you repeat?
The epsilon means you have slow advection and fast wave.
Yes.
Doesn't it mean you should have epsilon times u plus minus 2c in your equations?
No, I don't think so, no. But there is an epsilon inside the C parameter, the C variable.
Ah, I see, you covered it up. Okay.
Yes. And so this characteristic problem can be put into this form. So the quantity capital U minus 2C, the variation of the temporal variation is equal to 0. So the quantity u minus 2c is constant along characteristic curves. And the same thing for the other Riemann invariant. In a wave problem in the ocean, the Froude number is most of the time smaller than 1. So the absolute value of capital U divided by the characteristic propagation celerity is smaller than 1. So even for tsunami, classical wind-generated waves, and so on, the Froude number in a fixed frame is smaller than 1. So it means that U minus C is negative and U plus C is positive. So we have two characteristic directions. So the water depth at rest, and we have information coming from the right at velocity U minus C, and information coming from the left at velocity U plus C. And if we consider one-way right-going wave, so we consider that far away, here, the water is at rest, so U equals 0, and H equals D0, so a state at rest. All the information coming from the left correspond to the C state. So using the conservative, the Riemann, the fact that the left-going Riemann invariant is constant along characteristic curves, we deduce that capital U minus 2c is equal to 0, the velocity is equal to 0, plus 2c0, or 2 in fact, because c0 equals 1. So for right-going wave, we can replace U by 2c minus 2, and we obtain this one-way equation for wave propagation. So it's nonlinear. So the only assumption is that we are considering one-way propagating wave in this direction. So it is easy to show that the characteristic velocity is 3c minus 2, or can be expressed like that. And if epsilon is relatively small, there is no, and CH can be expressed like this, but it is not, this assumption is clearly not necessary. We can solve this equation very easily. It is like a Burger's equation, so we can solve analytically this equation. But for the sake of simplicity, I prefer to use this approximate relation, but it is clearly not necessary. So we use a classical approach. So to solve this equation, it is equivalent to consider that the temporal evolution of zeta equals 0 along characteristic curves. And if zeta is constant, of course, CH is constant, so the characteristic curve is a line. And so we can estimate, we can compute the elevation from the elevation of the initial state. So you can see the evolution of the wave field. Initially, in this case, it's a linear wave field, and its evolution over the time. So we can reconstruct the wave field depending on x and t using the initial condition zeta 0 and the evolution, the propagation at celerity ch at t equals 0. So ch is not, it is not a frequency dispersive wave field, but it is a nonlinear there are nonlinear dispersion, because the celerity, the characteristic celerity, that doesn't depend on wavelengths, but is related to wave elevation. It is an increasing function of wave elevation. So at crest, the characteristic velocity at crest is much higher than in the trough. So if you know the initial condition, you can follow the crest over the time, and also each point, so the trough, and you can see that due to the difference between celerity in function of wave elevation, there is a progressive distortion of the wave field. And we can compute analytically the elevation field in function of the initial condition. And we can compute also analytically the evolution of the wave slope. So the wave slope is det zeta dx, and so det zeta 0 dx 0 and dx 0 dx, and knowing this relation, we can compute this term, and we obtain this relation. Ch, the characteristic velocity, is given by this equation, so we can compute this derivative, and finally we obtain this relation for the evolution of the wave slope. So first considering wave, a special point at the rear of the wave. So here, for instance, here, so behind the wave front. Here you can see that, of course, by the elevation is increasing, so the slope is positive. So this term is always positive and is increasing. So it means that at the rear of the wave, behind the wave front, the slope with time is a decreasing function of time. And it is what we can observe. The initial condition, and progressively the wave slope is decreasing. So at the rear of the wave, the wave is more and more flat. Okay, now considering what occurs at the wave, at the wave front here, for instance. In that case, of course, for the initial condition, the slope is negative. So now this term is a decreasing function of time. And so the slope is an increasing function of time. It is why we can observe, you can see that the slope at the wave front is progressively increasing until a singularity occurs, an infinite slope that occurs in a finite time. To evaluate this time of shock occurrence, it is when this denominator is equal to 0. And so, knowing the maximum slope at the wave front of the initial wave, we can compute analytically the onset of shock formation. And this represents more or less the beginning, the onset of wave breaking. So is it clear? Are there any questions about? Yes.
Okay, just got lost when you said that it represented the onset of wave breaking. Maybe my mind just slipped away, but anyway, I got lost.
It is in fact a tool model. There's not all the the physics and especially the overturning. In fact, there are different types of wave breaking. The most spectacular is overturning, which is very nice for surfers, but it's not so common, in fact. Most of the time, we observe spinning breaking, so a small instability at the wavefront. And of course, this approach is potential, and we don't take into account such vorticity. But my purpose is to illustrate the nonlinearity and the formation of a sort of singularity.
Okay.
So it is more or less similar to the onset of wave breaking, but it is just a tool model.
Okay.
No more questions? So it is interesting to analyze such a process in the spectral domain. So I'm not sure it's clear. Yes. You can see here the energy spectrum in function of the mode, of the wave mode. So at the initial condition, we use in that case, but we can use any initial condition, but to simplify the problem, we consider a sinusoidal wave shape. In that case, the spectrum, all the energy is concentrated at mode 1. Mode 1 corresponds to this characteristic wavelength. Okay? So it is the initial condition. Due to nonlinear interaction, in the spectral domain, it corresponds to the quadratic interaction of the first mode with itself, leading to a transfer of energy at the second harmonic. So at the beginning, there is a transfer of energy of the first mode by a quadratic interaction of the same mode to the second harmonics. And as the distortion evolves, you can see that first and second mode interact together to transfer energy to the third one, to fourth, fifth, and at the onset of breaking, you can see that there are a transfer, a cascade of energy from the main mode to other harmonics. So it's very important because in this case, it's very simple. We are studying only at a monochromatic wave. In the field, it's much more complicated because we observe a random wave with a broadband spectrum, but the nonlinear process is nearly the same. Even for a random wave field, of course, for a random wave field, there is not only one mode, but there is a continuous spectrum. But due to nonlinear wave distortion in the Scholin zone, there are strong interaction between modes and the transfer of energy to the harmonics. So it's why it's important to have such interpretation of what it occurs in the spectral domain due to nonlinearities. So we have derived these simple tool models, but without many assumptions. And we are studying the effect. So you have the linear advection and the nonlinear terms, and with a quadratic interaction, due to this nonlinear term, zeta square. It is relatively easy to derive a more general equation, taking into account weakly dispersive effects, and which leads to this term. So these equations are named KdV equations or BBM equations. It's relatively well known. And but if we are interested in wave propagating in both directions, we need a system of equation for zeta and u. We can't apply the assumption that there are only one way wave propagation. So you need to solve the whole system. And for that, you need numerical simulation, especially if the initial condition is relatively complex. But it exists some analytical solution, especially for the solitary wave. So you can see here the analytical solution for a permanent wave, which is named a solitary wave. You can see the profile of a solitary wave, which propagates, keeping its shape a long time. And the expression of this wave is like that. And it is a special case, a very special case, where there is a complete balance between nonlinearities and dispersion properties. So nonlinearities tend to distort the wave field, and dispersion counterbalance this. And there is a special case for the solitary wave where both terms are totally in balance. I have to shift now to more naturalist presentation. Sorry. So for real application, we need to solve numerically the system equation, or the Serre equation, of course, and to assess the ability of this equation system to handle wave propagation for non-breakable wave, wave distortion, wave amplification in the Scholin zone. We need to use numerical simulation. And I present you some comparison between the Serre-Grignaldi equations and laboratory experiment. This experiment corresponds to the propagation of a solitary wave, as previously, but reaching a sloping beach. So in that case, there is no, the system is not, the wave have not a permanent form. There is a Scholin effect due to the slope. And you can see the classical amplification of the wave due to the variation of the slope. And also, the wave is more and more peaky and skewed. And you can see that, so the experimental data are in dot and continuous line for the Serre-Grignaldi equation. And you can see that the Scholin of non-breaking wave is relatively well reproduced by the model. It works also for periodic wave forcing. So the boundary condition is there, and you can see the Scholin, amplification of the wave, and after that breaking, but we will come later to that. So once again, we did a comparison, we made a comparison between a lab experiment by Cox and numerical simulation. The boundary condition is here, and there are several probes, but only two in the Scholin zone, L1, L2. L2 is just before the breaking point. So we are looking for the Scholin zone for non-breaking, so we can compare the model with a laboratory experiment, and you can see that the Scholin evolution is relatively well reproduced, a good agreement between experimental data and the model, except that just before wave breaking, the model underestimates slightly the wave amplitude. Okay, so I've nearly finished the modeling to describe the modeling approach for non-breaking wave. But of course, for real application, we need to take in account the breaking, the dissipation, the non-linearity of the wave. Here we are in the surf zone, and the formation of very or strongly non-linear wave. It is what I will describe now, the modeling of breaking waves. So, remembering this schematic sketch, the nearshore zone is composed of two zones, the shoaling zone, and we have studied this zone just before, and the surf zone. And remember that when waves break, they reorganize themselves into quasi-periodic Bohr-like wave. A sort of Bohr, a sort of hydraulic jump in translation. So you can see such Bohrs in this photo. So, and then when Bohrs are reaching the beach, there are some swash oscillation, and it is named the swash zone. So the approach that I want to describe is mainly related to inner surf zone and swash zone. So in the surf zone, you can see that, so just before the breaking, beginning of the surf zone, and the evolution shoreward. So you can see that there is a strong energy dissipation and a strong horizontal asymmetry and progressively a very strong vertical asymmetry leading to sawtooth wave. And remember, we have developed a toy model which is very close to Burger's equation, and it is well known that with Burger's equation, and more generally with hyperbolic nonlinear equation, we get such sawtooth wave shape. So it's very important phenomenon that we observe in the field, in the lab, in the inner surf zone. The wave shape tends to a sawtooth wave shape. So we need an appropriate model for describing energy dissipation, wave distortion, and other phenomena. Here you can see a schematic representation of a Bohr, sort of hydraulic jump in translation, propagating in the inner surf zone. So we can consider that this wave field associated with the Bohr in the inner surf zone is composed of a regular wave region where the surface elevation and the velocity are a smooth function of space and time. And of course, a wave front with vortices, a vortex which is named roller. So I hope you remember this equation, which comes from the integration, the vertical integration of the Euler equation. So this equation is almost exact one, with two unknown terms. This term is related to the vertical variability of the wave field over the water depth. And this one is related to the non-hydrostatic effect. So we have to parameterize these two terms for describing this broken wave field. So in the regular region, the elevation, the variables, are a smooth function of zeta and u. So in that case, we can use the preceding development, and we can use the Serre equation. There is and we can neglect in this zone. We can show that the turbulent process, there are some turbulent process in this zone, but we can neglect their contribution, and this term is relatively small in the regular wave region. So we can use the Serre equation. However, in the surf zone, the wavelength is very large in comparison with the water depth. So the mu parameter is very small, and so consequently for the regular wave region, we will neglect the non-hydrostatic term, and finally we use the relatively simple Saint-Venant equations. Of course, this approach can't apply to the wavefront, where there is a roller at the front of the wave and very strong turbulent motion and also shearing. So, of course, we can't apply such a smooth function approach. So we need to parameterize this zone. We need to parameterize the wavefront. For that, in shallow water, there are two main shallow water approaches. The first one is a shock wave approach, considering that the wavefront can be replaced by a discontinuity, a shock. We have seen previously that shock occur in a finite time for Saint-Venant equation. So the more simple approach is to consider that the wavefront can be described, parameterized by a discontinuity, a shock. More recently, Richard and Graviliuk have extended the shallow water approach by including by including a parameterization of this term, which take into account horizontal vorticity. So vorticity, vortices like that. So vortices in the wavefront. So they included, they extended the classical nonlinear shallow water approach, included vorticity, horizontal vorticity in their approach. And with such an approach, it's possible to describe the roller shape and the roller dynamics. However, during this talk, I will present only the more simple approach based on the shock wave, because this approach gives very good results for real scale application. So for this talk, I will only present this approach. So this approach is relatively simple. We consider that we can parameterize the wavefront by a discontinuity, by a shock. And we have seen before that it is in agreement with what we have seen for one-way equation, toy model, leading to shock formation. So it makes sense. So the shock is determined by the water depth H1 at the front and H2 behind the front. So the question is, of course, so we have presented a mathematical model based on physical consideration, but the question is, do shock wave solution of the Saint-Venant equation can properly reproduce nonlinear wave transformation, strongly nonlinear wave transformation, and energy dissipation in the surf zone? To do that, we need to come back to conservation principle, which write like this: conservation of the mass for a volume of fluid following the fluid between XA and XB, two particles of fluid, and we are looking at the evolution of this volume of fluid. So conservation of mass and conservation of momentum. The evolution of the momentum is equal to the sum of forces which apply to the volume of fluid. So this expression, so from this expression we can, of course, derive the Saint-Venant equation is this conservative form, no problem, for continuous flow, for smooth flow. But these equations are more general. The conservation principles are much more general than this equation, which apply only for smooth wave field. More general because with this principle we can take into account discontinuity. And so we will use this principle to derive a shock condition for the non-inertial water approach. So from this equation, this equation lead to this system, of course, in what we name a conservative momentum equation, conservative momentum form. And if the flow is smooth, we can derive this equation for U. It's straightforward. You have to develop this expression, and combining with the mass conservation equation, we obtain this non-conservative momentum equation. So you can use this one or this one. It's totally equivalent for smooth flow. But in presence of discontinuity, of shock, we need to use this equation to define the shock condition. So you can see here a zoom of the shock here, and we are considering the wave shock in the moving frame. Is the frame moving with the wavefront? The frame moving with velocity CB, which is the velocity of the wavefront. So in this moving frame, the velocity V is equal to U minus CB. Okay, we are just changing the frame of reference. And in this frame, there is conservation of mass. H1 V1 equals H2 V2 across the shock. And it is the same thing for the momentum flux. So the momentum, the mass momentum is conserved, and the momentum flux too. And from this equation, we can easily derive the expression of V1 and V2 in function of H2 and H1. So we have you a question?
Yes, I think I'm surprised by the sign because I thought that U1 should be larger than CB.
No, CB generally. Generally, V1 is larger than V2. And if you are looking for a tsunami, for instance, U1 is equals to 0, and U2 is large and positive, not negative. But subtracting the Bohr celerity, we find negative velocity in the moving frame. So we have derived these shock conditions. And if we are looking to the phone number, so the phone number is the velocity divided by the characteristic celerity, root GH. So this phone number is not similar to the one we saw previously. Previously, we saw a phone number in the fixed reference frame. And in this fixed reference frame, the phone number is always smaller than 1. But in the moving frames, the phone number can be smaller or larger than 1. And it is really easy to obtain the phone number ahead the font, which can be expressed like this. It is in a function of h2 over h1. And it is easy to see that the phone number is greater than 1. So it is a supercritical flow. And the phone number behind is smaller than 1. So it is a subcritical flow. So in fact, the shock represents the transition from a supercritical flow to a subcritical one. And now we have to consider the evolution of energy because we want to develop a model which handles the energy dissipation. So from the Saint-Venant equation, we can derive easily this energy conservation. So capital E is the total energy in the water column. So E equals the kinetic energy from the bottom to the surface elevation, half U square, plus the dz, plus the potential energy, ρ0, the fluid density, z, dz, and so the energy is equal to half h u square plus Ng, the gravity, ρ0 g, zeta square minus d square. And using the two conservation equations for the mass and momentum, you obtain the energy flux like that. So it is for the regular wave region, but what occurs at the shock level? So we can't conserve the mass, the momentum, and the energy. Physically and mathematically, it's impossible. And if we compute this term, dB, which is the energy flux at the front minus the energy flux behind the front, it is very easy using this shock condition. It is really easy to show that this term is positive. So it means that across the shock, the energy flux decreases. So there is a dissipation of energy. The dB is positive, so there is a dissipation of energy across the shock. And this dissipation follows this very simple relation. H2 minus H1 can be seen as the wave height. H2, H1. So capital H is H2 minus H1. So the dissipation evolves like the wave height to the power 3. So physically it makes sense for high breaking waves. The dissipation is high. And we can come back to the toy model with a one-way propagating wave. Remember, we have developed this. We were able to compute this analytical solution, and in a finite time, we get an infinite wave slope, so the formation of a shock. And after that, we will consider, at the level of the shock, a conservation of mass and momentum. So there is a transfer of mass, for instance, like this, to describe such. So in that case, we can compute, to calculate analytically the evolution of the wave field, only in a special case for one wave propagating wave. So I am in the moving frames. It is why you don't see the propagation of the waveforms, because this figure is in the moving frame. And what is very interesting is that with this very simple approach, we are able to reproduce this characteristic sawtooth wave shape, which is very close to what we observe in the field and in the lab. We can also analytically determine the dissipation in function of time, t over ts. Ts is the time for the onset of wave breaking. So at the beginning, there is a conservation of energy. You remember this equation is related to the conservation of energy in a regular part of the wave field. So until shock occurs, there is conservation, no dissipation. And at the beginning here, there is a very small shock, which is developing, a larger shock, and a saturated shock. The side shock is equivalent to the initial wave height. So at the beginning, the dissipation, the shock is very small, so the dissipation is small, and the shock, the shock height is increasing, so the dissipation is increasing. And when we reach this state, the wave is still dissipating, and so the amplitude of the wave is decreasing, and it is why the dissipation is decreasing. So it's a toy model. So perhaps it's not the reality, perhaps it's nothing to do with real physics. So this question still remains. We have developed a mathematical model based on very simple physical assumption: conservation of mass, conservation of momentum, that's all. And a representation of a breaking wave with a singularity, with a discontinuity. So to see if, to assess if this approach is correct or not for application, we need to use a numerical simulation. And we need shock capturing methods. And there are many shock capturing methods for shallow water equation, for all nonlinear hyperbolic systems. And you can find nice references in these two books, Toro 2001 and Lévesque 2002. These two books are devoted to numerical scheme for shock capturing scheme for essentially finite volume scheme for to handle shocks in shallow water approach. However, there is also a significant issue related to this term, which is the evolution, the gradient of the bathymetry. For gentle sloping beaches, for instance, there is no problem. In fact, you can, for instance, I have developed several years ago a very basic shock capturing model. And due to continuous evolution of the bathymetry, it was relatively no problem. But if you consider strong bathymetry with strong variation, you have to take care of this, because you need to compute the momentum flux with a Riemann solver in agreement with this source stem. It's not trivial. And otherwise, for instance, I represent a lake like that, and a fluid at rest. So a very simple problem. There is no motion. But if you don't take care of this, of the resolution of the the momentum fluxes and this term. If there are some strong bathymetry variation, some numerical oscillation can occur, even if the initial state is at rest. Due to these discontinuities, there are some numerical instability. So to avoid that, we need well-balanced schemes, such as proposed by Odus et al. 2004, Xing et al. And many others. Another problem, another issue is the modeling of the shoreline. For the swash zone, for instance, or for overtopping, and sometimes you have multiple shorelines when there are overtopping phenomena. And for that, we need a numerical scheme which preserve water depth positivity. And I give some references to this scheme. So now, we need to compare numerical simulation with shock capturing method with laboratory and field experiment. So first, we use a Cox experiment, and it corresponds to wave, periodic wave propagation, periodic wave generation here, and the breaking point is here. And we start to model the wave with the Saint-Venant equation in the inner surf zone. So the boundary condition of the model is there. In the fixed frame of reference, the fluid number is smaller than 1. So there are two characteristics propagating in the opposite direction. So at the boundary, we need only one physical information, either the elevation or the velocity, but with laboratory experiments, it's much more easier to measure the water depth than the velocity, the depth average velocity. So the model is forced by the wave elevation, but using non-reflective boundary condition. So we force the model with this boundary, and we can see here. So for the first probe, there is no difference between the model and the experiment because it is the boundary condition. And you can see the evolution of the wave field in the surf zone, in the inner surf zone. In dash line correspond to the experiment, and continuous line to numerical simulation. You can see that there is a very good agreement. You can observe the nonlinear distortion, and especially, so the phase, there is a very good phase agreement. So the model is able to handle a correct prediction of the wave celerity, and also to simulate the formation of a Sawtooth wave, very strong, with a very strong asymmetry. So, such a very simple approach, just Saint-Venant equation with shock condition. In fact, the physics is very simple. We are able to represent nonlinear distortion, energy dissipation. You can see that the energy dissipation is relatively well represented, and the formation of Sawtooth wave, very nice Sawtooth wave, and with a good representation of the broken wave celerity. Now some comparison with field data. I present you experiment on an Aquitaine beach during a storm, and with shore normal propagation of the wave. And you can see we deployed 6 pressure sensors. So with this pressure sensor, we were able to reconstruct the water depth. And so the model is forced by the water depth signals at P1. Of course, the agreement is not so good that for laboratory experiments, because in that case we neglect transverse variation of the wave field, we neglect the porosity of the... so it's not perfect. There are many hypotheses in that case. But at first order, you can see that there is a very good description of the wave field, of this irregular random wave field, with a strong energy dissipation. And you can see also that when we are close to the thrash zone, there are long waves. So the short wave, the wind-generated wavelength is short, of course. And you can see it's minute, so you can see a period of a long wave with a period of more than 1 minute. Remember at the beginning of the course, I mentioned infragravity wave generated by the interaction of the wind-generating wave, which transfer energy to low-frequency wave, which are named infragravity wave. And you can see that the model is able to handle the appearance of these nonlinear infragravity waves. And even at the shoreline, you can see that so the sensor is in water, in the thrash zone. Then there is a rundown of the water, and no more water on the sensor, so the water depth is equal to 0. And for the next wave packet, you can see that, this evolution, and finally the model is able to describe infragravity wave and the shoreline motions. So, nonlinear distortion, energy dissipation, sawtooth wave shape, and also infragravity wave and shoreline motions. Another interesting, je me rappelle plus à quelle heure je termine. Alan. Another interesting problem for random waves in the field, interesting issue is the phenomenon of Bohr merging. So remember that the celerity is an increasing function. So in the inner surf zone, there is no frequency dispersion. It's non-dispersive process. Non-dispersive in terms of frequency, but not in terms of amplitude, because the celerity is equal to GH, or not, U plus root GH. So the celerity is an increasing function of H. So larger bores, bores with a high amplitude, propagate faster than small bores. And so finally, the higher bore catch the smaller one and merge to form only one bore. So there is a strong nonlinear interaction with merging of bores. And to show if, to assess if the nonlinear shock capturing method is able to handle this problem, we have compared numerical simulation with a laboratory experiment performed by Van Dongeren and colleagues. They considered a bichromatic wave field, so with two characteristic frequency, F1 and F2, and the difference of F1 and F2 very small. So there is a slow modulation of the initial wave field. And this wave field is propagating on a constant beach slope. So you can see some numerical simulation. The time is like this, and the space, so it is the amplitude of the wave, time, and the exposition. So the shoreline is there. The wave propagated from here to the shoreline. So in this diagram, space and time diagram, you can see the trajectories of each wave, And so the wavelength is like this. And you can see that the model is able to reproduce shock margin, Bohr margin. Here, Bohr are coach, the highest Bohr are coach the smaller one to form. In that case, you can see one margin and a second one. And you can see that the shoreline is mainly controlled by low frequency motion. The characteristic period is mainly related to infragravity wave with a very long period in comparison with the period of the wind-generated waves. And now quantitative comparison between the model and the experiment at different probe locations. So we have one probe here. So the boundary condition is here, and several probes. And you can see that the model is once again able to reproduce the distortion of the wave, the dissipation, and also the margin of waves. The continuous line, very smooth, is the position of the infragravity wave. It's something else. The model is in blue, and in black it is the experiment. And so you can see that there is a very nice representation of the phenomenon, and with Bohr margin, you can see these three Bohrs, here, forming brutally only one Bohr. And at the end, you observe only very Bohrs, small Bohrs, but with a very large wavelength. So there is a cascade. I think in the Burgers community, with a physicist in turbulence working on Burgers equation, know relatively well this search of physical mechanism. With Burgers equation, you can observe exactly the same thing. So the merging of Bohr leading to an inverse cascade. So in turbulence, the energy cascade is generally from the large scale to the smaller one. With the Burgers equation or with the Saint-Venant equation, it is an inverse cascade. So, that means that the energy is transferred from the short wave to larger wave. And in the Burgers community, the physicists consider that it's a toy model for turbulence, for interaction of strongly nonlinear interaction, fluid interaction. And it is what we observe in the field and in the lab, with an inverse cascade of energy. And it's I think it's a nice result. And so this simple model, we don't need something much more complicated, because with this very basic mathematical model, we can simulate also Bohr margin. Perhaps, are there any questions? Yes?
I don't quite understand why you say that for the Burgers equation with shocks, the cascade is inverse. Because in my book, the energy on the large scales is decreasing, and therefore there is no energy pumped into it. And in my book, the small scales, which are the Fourier modes representing the shocks, they eat up all the energy. So to me, this is a perfectly forward-directed energy cascade.
Unfortunately, I have no spectral representation of the process, but I can draw the evolution of the spectrum. So for the first figure at the top of the slide, we can imagine that the spectrum is more or less like this, with the first mode, the characteristic wavelength of the flow. This characteristic wavelength or wave period is here. Whoop. With some harmonics. And at the end, when we are close to the swash zone, in the inner surf zone, there are no more energy. There are no more energy in this high frequency domain, and most of the energy is related to this mode, because the small scale, in fact, the energy which is related to the wind wave has totally disappeared. The energy which is here is only related to the harmonics of the wavefront. But are you agree that we move from short wave to larger wave? So it's why I speak about inverse cascade. Are you agree with?
I understand where that argument comes from, in the sense that the spacing of the pattern becomes larger.
Exactly.
That's obviously clear.
But if you really ask where is the energy going, then the characteristics, as you explained, they are moving into the shock, and then the energy the characteristics are carrying is actually dissipated in the high frequency modes that are representing the shock.
Okay, yes, it's sure that the dissipation of the wavefront is localized. So I agree with you, it's transferred to small scale processes, of course. But I am speaking about the phenomenon of Bohr merging. So in that case, there is a strong transfer of energy from a short wave to a larger wave. So they are both transfers. Okay, I agree with you. The main transfer is related to the small-scale processes at the wavefront. I agree with you. But due to Bohr merging, there are also a transfer to larger scale. Okay, I agree with you.
Yeah, by the eating up of small worlds by large.
Yes.
So, what do you have to keep in your models to be able to capture the infragravity waves? Which terms do you have every time? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
It depends, because infragravity waves are much less nonlinear than the short waves. So if you want to describe only long waves, you don't need a shock capturing method. But in the field, it is a mixing of both. So you need all the terms. Other questions? Okay. But we need a model which is able to describe the whole nearshore zone, not only the inner surf zone, of course. We need a global model. So firstly, we have derived the Serre-Grignaldi equation for non-breaking wave in the shoaling zone. Then after we have seen that, in fact, a very simple shallow water equation with shock condition works relatively well. But how do we manage the propagation of the wave in the entire domain? So we have developed a very pragmatic approach, and it is the following approach. For non-breaking wave in the shoaling zone, we use the Serre-Grignaldi equation with a non-diadostatic term there, here. And we analyze locally where front can form, and we shift locally to the Saint-Venant equation with a shock condition to simulate broken wave front and swash motion. So it's a pragmatic approach where we shift from, it's not mathematically certainly well posed, but we shift from the Sergin-Nalli equation to the Saint-Venant equations. For that, we need a wave-by-wave approach. We have to localize the wave front. So first we have to identify and characterize the wave front, and especially the characteristic slope, the celerity of the wave at each time. And in our approach, we have no physical information about the initiation, the onset of wave breaking. For my toy model with a one-way Saint-Venant equation, we can determine the onset of wave breaking. But for more complex situation, coupling Saint-Venant and Sergin-Nalli equation, we need a physical parametrization of the onset of breaking. So there are different empirical conditions. For instance, when the angle at the wave front is greater than a critical slope, we consider that the wave is starting breaking. There are other conditions. For instance, perhaps it's a more physically based condition. We consider that the wave is breaking when the velocity at the wave crest is greater than the Bohr celerity. It's really physical. It's close to the physics. So it's another criterion that is much more difficult to implement in a numerical model. It's a little bit unstable, so it's not easy. So Kalish, who is a mathematician, tried to handle this criteria. And we need also a breaking cessation, because when waves propagate, for instance, over a bar, so waves are coming like that. There are some shoaling, breaking, and Bohr formation. So there is a strong energy transfer to the first mode, to the harmonics, and all the harmonics are linked. They move together, which is related, and the sawtooth wave shape is related to the fact that all harmonics are moving together. But so the water depth is like that. Sorry, Bohr, and strongly nonlinear Bohr, and when waves move in deeper water, the epsilon parameter, the nonlinearity, strongly decrease. And so there is no so much interaction between modes. So the modes become free and propagate at with the dispersion relation, with the dispersive celerity. So they are moving freely. So if you are a characteristic wavelength like that, you can observe very small wave, a non-breaking wave. So it's a very interesting problem. So it's not, with our approach, it is impossible to handle this approach without empirical parametrization. So we use another physical criterion, that is that when the Froude number of the shock of the Bohr is smaller than the critical Froude number, 1.3, and this information comes from a laboratory experiment. Bohr, there is no more breaking, but ondular Bohr, okay. So we use this approach. So it is a Scholling zone with Sergin-Nalli equation. And locally, at the wavefront, we shift to the Saint-Venant equation. You can see small oscillation in this simulation, which are not so recent. There are new models, for instance, for Arnaud Durand and other researchers, where this problem is relatively is not so present. And these small oscillations are related to the transition between the two equation systems. But globally, we have a good description with shoaling and breaking and dissipation of the Bohr. And yet now we can compare with the evolution for all probes, and you can see that there is a very good evolution. Especially in terms of phase of the wave, leading to this sawtooth wave. Another application similar to this one, you can see the evolution of the wave field. Pardon. Wave shoaling, formation of Bohr, and due to the decrease of non-linearities, there is the wave components become free, and you can see now the simulation. So you can see the shoaling, wave breaking, wave dissipation, and then the appearance of small oscillation of free waves. And it is also very well reproduced by the model. We are in agreement. So you can see the evolution into sawtooth wave breaking, and then just after the bar, small oscillation occurs, which are free waves. So I think it's all for today, but perhaps are there any questions?
So first we can thank Philippe. And okay, questions?
Thanks. What is the sensitivity to the thresholds that you just mentioned, to phi or FC? If you change a little bit the values, how is it sensitive to the model?
Yeah, it is an issue, a real issue. For the inner surf zone, for the breaking in the inner surf zone, there is no threshold. So the physics is relatively well reproduced by the shock capturing approach. But it's true that the onset of wave breaking is not so well-posed parametrization. So there are some sensitivity, it's true. We use fixed parametrization. We don't change the parametrization. We have optimized some parameters, and we don't change this parameter. But it is true that for certain application, the wave breaking is delayed, and not in the other case. It depends. But there's something very interesting. It's not clear for me at all. Is that the behavior in the inner surf zone, even if we make some mistake for the onset of breaking. So the evolution is like that: shoaling, breaking, sawtooth. So the breaking is here, and if our criteria are not so good, and we activate the breaking here, okay. So the description of the wave field close to is relatively well reproduced, but for an unknown reason, unknown for me, the phase is relatively well reproduced, and in the inner surf zone, there is a very good match between experiment and numerical solution. So even if we make some errors due to this parametrization, curiously, perhaps a mathematician could help me for that, in the inner surf zone with the sawtooth wave, we find a good. So it is a little bit curious because we have, in fact, a bad boundary condition. It's not boundary condition, but a sort of boundary condition. Even when they are relatively wrong, we obtain a good match, a good agreement in the inner subzone. I don't know why.
So, if I well understood, the Serre-Green-Nagdi equation cannot be used to produce the Bohr formation.
Yes.
Even though they have more precise terms.
Yes.
So, how can we analyze it?
Because Serre-Green-Nagdi equations are based on Euler equation. So, without viscosity, without energy dissipation, there is a conservation of energy with. In the framework of Serre-Green-Nagdi equation. So you can introduce friction, for instance, but we can't describe the dynamics of Bohr in themselves. If you compute the wave propagation with the Serre-Green-Nagdi equations, you will observe a good shelling. At the beginning of breaking, there are very strong gradients, and the dispersion are too strong. And so the wavefront is propagating like that, okay? But you observe very strong oscillation, which is totally unphysical, because there is no loss of energy at the wavefront. So all the energy implies such a very strong oscillation. It's not a numerical problem. It's not. It is a physical issue because the dispersive terms are strongly impacted by that, by the formation of the wavefront. So. We need a local dissipation of the energy, which is not taken into account with the Serre-Green-Nagdi equation.
Does there any more questions? So we can thank again Philippe.